You know, there's a lot of old wives' tales in the world. You got a lot of old wives' tales out there. Don't go outside without your jacket. You're gonna get a cold. Or like my grandma would say, sleep with a bar of soap under your feet or whatever for your skin and to keep away bad dreams. Whatever these old ones are, we got the same similarities in old wives' tales and people just looking at past events and not taking into account modern day medicine on people recovering from injuries that don't matter as much anymore. And let's zoom out for this one. Woof! Look at that. Get the whole landscape of what we be doing in this house. But you get these, right? You get these situations where people are just anchored on past things. And now we have a situation where wide receivers changing teams. You can't hit them. You can't touch the wide receivers changing teams. Vincent Jackson. We can name a bunch. Demaryius Thomas once he started to get older. All these players start to change teams. Jordy Nelson goes to the Raiders and they're not the same player. Okay, well, why don't we look a little bit deeper into it? Why don't we see, as I shake my entire desk, that there's a situation where a lot of these players are older changing teams. They're not in their prime anymore. They're not their 26 to 28-year-old selves. And really for wide receivers, 24 to 26, right? They're not in that age range. So we start to see some of these wide receivers last year at the edge of that age range, right? You see your DeAndre Hopkins, who's still an elite player in the league, change teams. Nobody really wants to take him. He starts falling into the second and third round last year. Stephon Diggs changes teams. Nobody really wants to take him. Stephon Diggs, who somebody was a third, fourth round picks with the Vikings, is now going to a potentially better situation. No Adam Thielen last year. Has an offense that's being built around the quarterback, bringing in Steph Diggs, drafting Gabe Davis and Zach Moss, bringing in Cole Beasley. They're going all in on Josh Allen to see if he's worth the investment, as his first 2 years weren't that great, weren't outstanding. They bring in Steph Diggs, and he starts to get taken in the 5th round of NFL drafts and fantasy football drafts last year. So there's this thought process last year, and now it's starting to shift where, okay, maybe if these guys aren't 30 years old changing teams, right? 30 years old with maybe not as much motivation, knowing this is probably their last contract, not having too much oomph left in the tank just physically and maybe mentally now, maybe if they're not 30, it'll actually work out. And we had a guy, a big guy, the only guy who really got paid with a multi-year contract, 4-year deal this offseason. He went to the Big Apple. This wide receiver that you're probably already knowing was Kenny Golladay. And now there's talk about Kenny Golladay. He's switching teams. He's going to Daniel Jones, who's arguably one of the bottom 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. He's going to a team that has arguably the worst offensive line in the NFL. I get all that. But Kenny Golladay, Kenny G, let's bring you back in here. Kenny G last year was a player who was going as a, in some drafts, top 5 wide receiver. I had him as my number 6 wide receiver last year. Most sharp analysts had him at a top 10 and a top 8 wide receiver last year, which meant that more often than not, he was being taken in the 3rd round. It was rare you got him in the 4th round. Well, this year, Kenny Galladay's ADP is 57th overall as of this recording. That means he's going with the 8th pick in the 4th round. So mid to end of the 4th round in 12-team drafts. He's currently the wide receiver 26 off the board. He is my wide receiver 22 in PPR formats, in wide receiver 19 in non-PPR, because he's never caught more than 70 balls in a season, 70 and 65, his 2 highest reception years in his 4 seasons. Only 4 seasons as an NFL player. He came out old. He came out at 23 years old, quote-unquote old, right? He's now 27, moving to New York. And there are a lot of similarities, but some key differences between Stephon Diggs and Kenny Golladay. So Kenny Golladay is a streaming value right now for 2021 fantasy football drafts. And let's start to analyze why. If you want to look at the similarities, they're the obvious similarities. They both switch teams. But there's a little bit more than that. Josh Allen was a player that the organization was building around moving into last year to say, hey, we're going to put everything we have into this year, and if you don't work out, we're probably going to start looking for a new quarterback. We're going to get you a good slot receiver, Cole Beasley. We're going to get you a dominating outside receiver, good route runner, in Stephon Diggs. We'll draft you another running back who can maybe bruise it around. We'll draft you another receiver, and Gabe Davis will go 4 wide receiver sets a lot, right? They started to do that. They started to ensure the offensive line. It was a borderline top 10 unit moving into last year. Similar things are happening in New York. They said, okay, we'll go ahead. We hear you. We'll go get you this gadget player in Kadarius Toney. We'll go get you Kenny Golladay on the outside. They brought in some depth pieces that probably aren't going to end up mattering as much in John Ross and Dante Pettis on the outside as burners, but they start to make some efforts here. They draft another running back in the NFL draft in Brightwell, so they're starting to make some efforts here. Now, there's some differences, and it mainly revolves around the playing styles. Kenny Golladay is this big size, speed specimen, right? Coming out 220 pounds. The dude's like 6'4", 6'5". He's a massive body. He wins on the outside, jump balls, down the field. field, he's not going to pile up receptions. Whereas Steph Diggs, 100 reception season type guy, insane route runner, they have these different styles. So the actual players are different. I would say Steph Diggs is a better overall piece for an offense than a Kenny Golladay, and I'm not too sure many people would argue that if you're building an offense. Steph Diggs last year, though, started to get taken in the 5th round, just like Kenny Golladay is very close to getting drafted there this year. And the big difference is they're changing teams. If Kenny Golladay was still in Detroit with Matt Stafford this year, there's a really good chance, Golladay who sat out most of last year, there's a really good chance that Kenny Golladay is still a 3rd to 4th round pick, not a 4th to 5th round pick. And last year I said he did sit out, and you can see on the screen right now, Kenny Golladay in 5 games, he averaged only 4 receptions per game and 5.4 targets per game, just a 19.5% target share. The year before that was his big season. He played all 16 games. He had 65 receptions, 5 less than his career year the year before that from a reception standpoint, but almost 1,200 yards, 116 targets, 7.2 targets per game was good to see. But he's never going to be this guy who converts a lot of his targets because a lot of them are deep downfield. In that 2019 year where he played all 16 games, Kenny Golladay was number 1 in deep targets with 2.3 per game. He ended up finishing 4th in yards per reception at 18.3. But in his 4-year career, he's only averaging a 58.1% catch rate. That is well below average because most of his targets are 10 to 15 yards down the field. He's never topped 70 receptions, so you don't have that PPR upside. He has averaged, though, an impressive 16.8 yards per reception. And that's the part of his game that we all know and we all love. So as much as I like Kenny Golladay and really love the player, was taking him a lot in the 3rd and 4th round last year, I must admit I'm terrified about Daniel Jones. We can't just point to last year, one situation that we've seen. Maybe you can find 1 or 2 other ones, but we can't just point to the Josh Allen situation last year and say, there it is. That could be Daniel Jones, right? Because Daniel Jones has some big glaring differences than Josh Allen had last year. Well, Josh Allen, first of all, I would say had better weapons going into that and definitely better protection. I mean, Daniel Jones is coming off of a season last year where he finished 28th in yards per attempt on the screen right now at 6.5 yards per attempt. He ended up finishing 29th in passer rating. He was 30th under pressure. He was 24th in accuracy, right? Terrible. The one thing that he was good at was throwing the deep ball, which makes some sense with getting Kenny Golladay. He was number 7 in deep ball accuracy, but he didn't throw a lot. He threw the 23rd most deep attempts, 2.8 per game. So if he starts to throw more, maybe that starts to escape him as well. Outside of just not being accurate, and a lot of that might have to do with the protection, they haven't given the guy an offensive line. Same thing for Saquon Barkley. You draft him early in the 1st round, you don't give him an offensive line. You take Daniel Jones early, you don't give him an alpha. They tried last year with Andrew Thomas, and it just didn't end up working out. Daniel Jones has 29 career fumbles in 17 games, 22 interceptions in 17 games. He's lost 17 of those fumbles. So overall, how many times he's turned the ball over? 39 times in 27 games. I mean, you're looking at Aaron Rodgers, a guy who might have 6 turnovers in a season, in an entire season. In 2 seasons, maybe he hits double digits, right? You're looking at those stark differences, and you're like, can we just get somewhere in the middle? And that's what they're hoping to do this year. But they haven't really done much to the offensive line. This is the key difference between, but there's a Josh Allen leap that he can take. There's the wide receiver they got, and they got one in the draft. This can be the Josh Allen leap for Daniel Jones. The big difference is offensive line. Jones's offensive line is thought to be bottom 5 going into this year, if not the worst. I mean, PFF ranked them 31st overall last year in offensive line play. They were ranking them 32nd this year. And you could just look at some of the stuff. Andrew Thomas, the rookie that they took top 5 overall last year, he ended up giving up the most pressures out of any left tackle in the NFL by 14 pressures. Their center, Nick Gates, ranked 29th amongst all centers last year. They ended up losing Nate Soldier, who opted out for COVID, and he's not the greatest of players anyways, and now he's coming back this year, but they're trying to shuffle around their offensive line to make it work. They did draft a 3rd rounder in terms of Matt Peart last year, and they did bring in an offensive lineman in free agency. Those players are going to have to actually be a big piece. So you know my stance on this stuff. I don't like saying if, because if you start to throw too many ifs out there, something's eventually not going to work, or many things won't work for you. So this offensive line is just a bunch of ifs. If Andrew Thomas can take a massive 2nd-year leap, if Nate Soldier, who just took a year off and hasn't played the position they're looking to play him at in a decade, can play well there, if the 3rd-round pick they took last year can develop, if the free agent they signed can be a major impact, right? If 2 of those things don't work, you have a bad offensive line. And based on last year, I see no reason why I should believe that those things will work. So that is my big concern here. And why does that matter for Kenny Golladay? The obvious reason is then Daniel Jones will be pressured more. Daniel Jones will not be as comfortable more. Daniel Jones will not have time to throw deep more, which is Kenny Galladay's entire game. Kenny Galladay's not catching 5-yard screen passes. So that's where this can all fall apart. A terrible offensive line. That's why Saquon Barkley, outside of just own injury problems, outside of not having Eli Manning to check down to him, that's why it could be an issue for him as well. I mean, he's just getting hit by pressure after pressure because there's nobody on this offensive line that even looks like a quality player. So that is my main pause on saying that he's a must-draft wide receiver, Kenny Gotti, because I can see the obvious flaw, and that flaw is glaring. but I can say that he is a quality receiver. Like, with that all in mind, I still have him as a number 22 above ADP right now. I still have him as somebody I'm fine taking in the 4th round, but you get him often in the 5th round. I've gotten Kenny Golladay in the 6th round a couple of times this year. That's a mistake. This is a borderline top 10 athletic wide receiver, skilled wide receiver in the league, who's now going to be the number 1 in an offense still for a guy who does like to throw the ball deep and throw it with success. It's just a matter, does that player in Daniel Jones have the time to do so? So the target competition, you know, Saquon Barkley's there, but I mean, since Eli Manning, he hasn't really been, one, healthy, but also getting any checkdowns. Daniel Jones run more, and Daniel Jones does not check it down. He looks to the slot, if anything. Hence, Golden Tate, Sterling Shepard, big games the last couple of years when they've been in the slot. So I'm not too worried about Saquon Barkley snagging a bunch of targets. If anything, that's going to hurt the Kadarius Tonys in the slot. You now have Golden Tate gone. He's leaving a 14.3% target share left. He ended up seeing overall 17% of the air yards, which will help Gallaudet get a little bit more, and 52 total targets last year in his 12 healthy games. Sterling Shepard is somebody that I think will move into the slot more. Kenny Golladay on the outside. Maybe they go with a Darius Slayton on the outside, whoever it might be. I mean, Kadarius Toney will be in the slot when he's on the field. But Sterling Shepard was an elite player when he actually entered the slot. He has now had back-to-back seasons of 23+% of the target share. Daniel Jones likes throwing his way. So that will be the main target competition, in my opinion. The main piece will be Sterling Shepard, but they can complement each other. Shepard gets a lot of his work done when he's in the slot and even on the outside in the short to intermediate range. He can kind of open up, if you will, with Kadarius Toney there, their 1st round pick, open up some of that deep stuff for a Kenny Golladay. Kadarius Toney was the rookie they took in the 1st round, and out of Florida, he had the big senior year, but even that year, he never had 1,000 yards in his year. He didn't break out till 2020. He ended up playing a lot of special teams, which is a good indicator of breakout success in the NFL. But even in his 11 games during his breakout campaign last year that you can see on the screen, he had 984 yards, 10 touchdowns, but his low ADOT, he was being targeted on screens and gadget plays. He had 84 targets. This was his best season, 82% in the slot. So he's not going to be this full-time player that's going to usurp Sterling Shepard. This is not like Elijah Moore with the other New York team, potentially going to take work away from Jamison Crowder. It's not that situation. This is Sterling Shepard has his strong role, and Kadarius Toney comes in 4 wide receiver sets, out of the backfield, some gadget stuff. I think that's what's going to happen. Weird thing to do and waste a 1st-round pick on, in my opinion. Outside of that, though, they don't have much left. John Ross and Deonte Perez, I told you they brought in. John Ross only ran 60 routes last year and only played 8 games a year before that. He's not too much of a threat right now to Kenny Golladay. There's no threat to Kenny Golladay. Yeah, they have Darius Slayton out there, who I think Darius Slayton, now a 3rd-year player, is a quality player, played all the games last year, saw a 19.4% target share. I do think there's a real case to be made that it could be Darius Slayton, Kenny Golladay on the outside, Sterling Shepard in the slot, and 3 wide receiver sets. I think that's their best outcome here. Darius Slayton, for the most part, looks a lot like a Kenny Golladay, but Kenny Golladay is the more supreme version, the faster, the bigger, the more versatile from a jump ball standpoint, especially around the red zone. But Slayton is sort of this poor man's option for you. So you have your deep threats and you have your intermediate range. I don't think there's really any competition on a one-on-one basis. It's the clear alpha in Kenny Golladay and then Sterling Shepard after that. I don't think there's much competition here. The problem is, does he get the overall usage? If he's going to finish as a top 15 wide receiver, he's going to need the 8 to 10 touchdown season and really a top 10. But if you just want him to finish wide receiver 20, where he's being taken a round later than that right now, you get your 6 touchdown season out of Kenny Golladay, right? You get your 1,000-yard season on your 60 receptions, and you're probably seeing Kenny Golladay finish right around wide receiver 20 and being, right now for me, a glaring value in fantasy football drafts this 2020 draft season. So what are you waiting for? Draft Kenny Golladay. Thank you for tuning into this video. If you want the 2021 rankings, tiers, top 200s, player profiles, a whole bunch of stuff, get it right now. Limited time offer for free, F-R-E-E, in the link down below. Thanks to our sponsors at PrizePicks. Check out the rest of my content for the 2021 fantasy football season in the playlist that's on the screen right now. Smack the subscribe button if you're brand new here, and any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. Thanks for tuning in today, gang. Go Kenny G, or go home.